It's a video extra from the Mossad Files. I'm Dan Raviv, a former correspondent with CBS and co-author of 6 books about Israeli intelligence, strategy, and diplomacy. The latest is an ebook with my co-author Yossi Melman. It's called Target Iran. It's the true story of how the Mossad thoroughly penetrated Iran. And that is a very appropriate topic with what's in the news lately and for our guest. I'm happy to be joined by Joel Rubin. There he is. You're a former Deputy Assistant Secretary of State during the Obama administration, a strategist in the Democratic Party, an expert in foreign affairs, of course. You're the founder of a consulting and PR company called Washington Strategy Group, and we can see you and read you on Substack, where your Substack is The Briefing Room. You're on a lot of cable TV channels, and thanks for taking the time to be on the Mossad Files. And Joel Rubin, it's not unusual that you have something you want to add.
I hate to say it's the briefing book, but
Not The Briefing Room. Thank you. The Briefing Book.
But I like The Briefing Room too. That sounds awesome.
No, you're getting a lot more attention now for that name. The Briefing Book is Joel Rubin's Substack. Okay, here's what we're talking about. Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to the White House, the 7th time that he got together with President Trump. So they framed themselves as, really great friends, really close. Last June, when Israel and then the U.S. attacked Iran, focused on the nuclear program in Iran, the U.S. attacked Iran. Let's not forget that. Supposedly, the Trump administration was having talks with Iran, and that's what's happening right now. In fact, the readouts from President Trump and from Netanyahu said that President Trump has decided to go on negotiating with Iran. Trump said they'd better make a deal, otherwise havoc will occur, terrible destruction, and he'll give it about a month. I wonder if that's true. Netanyahu headed home to Israel and obviously did not like what Trump was doing, or at least in their official statement, did not like what Trump was doing. Netanyahu basically said, I told the president that he cannot trust the Iranians, and don't only make a nuclear deal, it has to include also Iran's ballistic missiles, the ones that go high in the air and can hit Israel like last June, and also Iran's behavior in supporting extremist and terrorist groups all around the Middle East. And so Trump and Netanyahu not on the same page, or so it seems. Joel Rubin, we're going to talk about Iran, what might be next. We're going to talk about Gaza, what might be next. And we're going to talk about U.S. politics, because you often write and speak about the nexus between foreign policy and American politics. But let's start with what you feel you saw between these two supposedly close friends, Trump and Netanyahu.
Yeah, Dan, it's wonderful to be with you. And the Mossad Files is a must-listen, must-watch podcast. So thank you for including me in the discussion today. Look, I think the visit was rushed by Prime Minister Netanyahu. He was slated to come anyways a little bit later, but moved up his visit. And it was a very quiet visit. There was not a big press conference after it. No pomp and sort of ceremony that the public really got a glimpse of. So this means that this was a very serious meeting, a very serious intervention by Prime Minister Netanyahu, because he believes clearly that the President Trump is looking for some kind of nuclear deal now. And in many ways, President Trump is a victim of his own rhetoric in getting to this place. Because if you remember several weeks ago, when the regime was massacring its own people in the streets of Tehran and elsewhere by the thousands to put down a popular civilian protest movement against the regime, President Trump said, you better stop. He threatened them, sent in aircraft carrier groups, or one that is now, a second is on its way, and essentially said, hey, go out in the street, people, we're going to protect you, reminiscent of what we did to the Marsh Arabs in Iraq after we defeated Saddam Hussein in the Gulf War, where we encouraged him to rebel and then turn tail and they got mowed down by Saddam. And so the president is sort of stuck in that rhetoric and now looking for a way out, not an easy way out, but a way out. And I do think that diplomacy has always been part of his vision about how to deal with Iran. But and I'll close with this. The irony is that the diplomacy of now looks exactly like the diplomacy that Joe Biden engaged in 2022, when he couldn't get the Iranians to agree to a nuclear coming back into the nuclear deal. And so it's back to the future, despite everything that's happened in the last 4 or 5 years in the region.
And of course, I'm so glad you reminded us that President Trump told the protesters in Iran, I'm going to protect you. I'm going to
Yeah.
help you. And we know that the protesters have been waiting for that. There is a pretty solid report in the Wall Street Journal that the U.S. did deliver a lot of Starlink internet reception devices, and that helped the
Yeah.
protesters. And I think we knew, Joel, right, that the U.S. was helping in some way. But Trump being Trump, there was an expectation there'd be military action. And now, as you say, he's moved what he calls a great armada. He's trying to threaten the Iranians, but he keeps talking about just the nuclear issue, that Iran must not have any uranium enrichment, must not have a nuclear program. Not much talk of human rights. There never is from him.
And Dan, that's why I think the prime minister got engaged, because for Israel, for the prime minister, human rights inside Iran has never been an issue that he's really focused on or advocated for. Of course, he'd love to see the regime fail and fall. That's without question. But he's not a guy who goes out there and calls for human rights protections and democracy in Iran. What he does talk about, though, is the regional proxies, terrorist militias, and the ballistic missiles in particular, which did have a physical impact on Israel during that June war. They were harsh, they're strong, and it's the powerful tool inside of Iran that could be weaponized with nuclear material if the Iranians do go that route. So that's where I think Netanyahu saw a window or a gap in the negotiation strategy of the White House, which is only talking nuclear and not talking ballistic missiles or regional issues. So, but was talking about human rights. So there's some disconnect there, and that's why I think we saw him come in so fast to DC.
But at the same time, would you agree that, again, we don't know everything about it, when it comes to intelligence cooperation and military cooperation, those seem to be strong, allowing for the possibility of a repeat of what happened last June, where, again, Israel might strike first and then the U.S. The coordination is there. We don't know everything going on. Would you even buy the notion, because there are people on X and elsewhere who are writing this, that they look like they disagreed, Netanyahu and Trump, but maybe they're really cooking up an attack plan?
Couple of thoughts on this. First of all, I would love to read your recent book, because when it comes to the intelligence cooperation and the intelligence that the Mossad gathered inside Tehran, that was a seminal achievement. The question, of course, is did they shoot their wad? Is that it? Did they have to now rebuild capacity? Did they take out everything, or was there some leftover intelligence that they didn't waste in order to have a second wave of attacks like we're talking about right now? I think that's an unknown. Without a doubt, the United States is supporting in that area. But also, one of the downsides of the past year from the Trump team is they have eliminated a lot of the aid and assistance to democracy type movements around the world, including those inside Iran. So some of the aid programs that we were using to promote and support civil society in Iran and elsewhere, and Radio Free Europe or Radio Farsi or Al Hurra TV, those have all been eliminated. So we are actually weaker on the soft power into Iran. But to your question about the
Possible
good cop,
secret
bad
coordination?
cop,
Yeah.
good cop, bad cop, right? Look, they did that routine before in May of last year, May and June. I see absolutely no reason to think it's otherwise. I don't think there's much of a difference in mindset between those two. And that's why when President Trump said, okay, no more strikes to Netanyahu back in June, Netanyahu said, okay, we're done. And that was it. The way that, I have to say politically, the way that President Trump is talking about this issue, if the president's name were Obama or Biden, we would have seen Netanyahu then, after his meetings at the White House, go to Capitol Hill and start screaming from the rooftops. He didn't do any of that this time. And that's, I think, because he basically feels very comfortable with President Trump on these issues.
Very good. No indication that he had to go to Lindsey Graham and other Republican friends of Israel, say, please tell President Trump, because he's not listening. No indication that he's not listening.
That tells you all you need to know.
There you go. Except Trump wants to continue negotiations with Iran, or so he says. And let's bring in the Gaza Strip as another part of the picture. Again, it would be too black and white to say there's the possibility of kind of a deal that, from Netanyahu's point of view, he's telling Trump, okay, you can talk to Iran, but we're going to have to attack Iran. And in exchange, we, Israel, we're going to be softer on Gaza. We're going to allow Gaza reconstruction. We will pull back the troops of the IDF, right? I mean, there's a lot going on with Gaza. And this coming week, there's a meeting of Trump's new creation, the Board of Peace, which Netanyahu has now joined, signing a document in Washington. So where does that come into it, do you think?
There's really interesting dynamics happening on the Palestinian file, broadly speaking, because there's the West Bank, which we need to also discuss. But when it comes to Gaza and the Board of Peace, Prime Minister Netanyahu signed on to it this week. I think he needed to give some legitimacy. But I got to tell you, that is an achievement for President Trump, because getting the Israelis bought into his process of this ceasefire stage 2 now, which is the goal is disarmament of Hamas and then the civilian administration by Palestinians from Gaza and then absorbing reconstruction aid. If you don't have Israel somewhat engaged or supporting it, the legitimacy of the endeavor really is low. But now they're in. Good. We'll see next Thursday. They'll meet at USIP, U.S. Institute of Peace, now the Trump Institute of Peace. They'll have the board meeting. It's going to be what in diplomats at state we would always call the tin cup exercise, which is basically fundraising and asking for donations or pledges. I'm sure a lot of money will be pledged, not a lot realized perhaps, but a lot pledged at the meeting. The Indonesians are saying they may put in military force for the stabilization force. So all that's swimming in the direction where Trump, he wants to go. The interesting wrinkle in this is that Trump seems to want to control and own Gaza now, a la Venezuela, and have the Board of Peace oversee it, but it be him in name. And so that's going to be intriguing. The Israelis, they trust Trump, but I'm not sure they want to hand over authority of Gaza to the United States either. That's going to be really hard politically in there. And then you have, at the same time, got to add the West Bank and a decision by the cabinet to essentially end much of the Oslo structure of areas A, B, and C and allow for expanded settlement construction. And that creeping annexation question now has also entered into the discussion where Trump says, I'm opposed to annexation. But that doesn't mean he's necessarily opposed to these steps. So a lot popping, but the Board of Peace meeting, getting the Israel on board, that is an achievement by the White House.
Isn't it something that President Trump has become aware of the West Bank issue, where those who follow the Middle East closely, like you, know that Jewish Israeli settlers have frankly been running wild. There's been violence, yeah, sure, some of it caused by Palestinian extremists, but the settlers are holding their own and getting support from the key right-wing ministers in Netanyahu's government. But I have to add this.
And it's an election year for him. It's an election year for him. Sorry.
That's what I wanted to add. Those extremist ministers might be out. Who knows? There has to be an election in Israel by the end of October. Netanyahu may wait till then, but still, we're in a year of change, not to mention, but we have to, that Trump faces the realities of the midterms. And so let's go to U.S. politics. I mean, I, as a reporter all those years, I was overseas and then in Washington, but I felt, despite my interest in foreign affairs and yours, it rarely affected U.S. voters. They're certainly not interested in the details, but instead maybe the image. Is the president strong in the world, or which party seems to be best? But again, voters don't care much. So Iran, Gaza, U.S. voters will be affected?
Well, there used to be a way we would discuss the importance of foreign affairs in voter preference, which is, and in particular related to the presidential election, which is sort of a baseline qualifier. Like, can you see this person as commander in chief to protect us, keep us safe? And I think in the Democratic Party, to just put my party hat on, right now, that's that litmus test is entering into the Israel-Gaza dynamic and the Palestinian file. Questions abound at every Democratic primary around the country about where are you on Gaza? Where are you on aid to Israel? And so we're seeing those issues become the primary foreign policy issue in the discussion, but they're not just relegated to foreign policy. It is having an influence on the perception of the candidates as will they, I'll frame it this way, will they stand up for the oppressed? Will they stand up for the Palestinians? That's the frame. Or will they stand up for the powerful? And will they stand up for the Israelis? That's the framing inside the Democratic Party. I'm not saying I agree with it, but that's how it's going. So you see this across the board now in Democratic primaries. We just had one in New Jersey, 11, a special election to replace Mikey Sherrill, who won for governor. She's a moderate Democrat. And in her stead was a multi-candidate Democratic primary, Tom Malinowski, a former congressman, foreign policy expert, who also has been critical of Israel's behavior during the war, but also strongly says I'm pro-Israel. AIPAC ran about $2.5 to $3 million of ads against him, and weakened his candidacy to the point where a very far left anti-Israel candidate supported by Bernie Sanders won. Analilia Mejia. She beat him like 28 to 27%. So 28% is very little, but it was enough to win. And now she's in,
and we know the
and she's gonna
participation
win.
we know the participation in primaries can be low. So activists and
Yes.
people who really care get involved. So J
There you
Street,
go.
the, if you will, liberal progressive group of American Jews, who J Street saying we support Israel, but we want Israeli policy to change. J Street liked Malinowski. AIPAC despised him for not being loyal enough. Let's be blunt.
Right.
I understand that this primary is for a special election where even the member of Congress won't even serve that long. There'll be another go at it for November, right?
But here's the irony, right? Is that J Street supports Malinowski, AIPAC opposes him, and it's like a mutual assured destruction. And in through the gap comes in the far left anti-Israel candidate that neither wanted to be associated with, and that's what we now have. And she is going to win the primary, which means she'll serve the rest of this term to replace the Mikey Sherrill seat. And concurrent to that, they're also going to have another primary for the general election in November for next year. So she doesn't win the seat for next year, only for the remainder of this year. But the Democrats of New Jersey, as parties do, are coalescing around her and endorsing her, including Mikey Sherrill. So it's now become very difficult for AIPAC folks. I didn't think they expected this from what I'm gathering, but it's getting really difficult to find someone to run against her.
Okay, so at least on the Democratic Party side, foreign affairs
Right.
does
And
come
this
in
is
because
where Republicans can come in. But okay, sorry, I cut off
oh
your,
no, I got your point. Republicans will say they just simply have a firm stand with
That's right.
America's friend
And maybe they'll
Israel.
get the AIPAC support.
And whatever Trump does currently with Gaza and maybe even more so with Iran, kinetic, perhaps violent, could help him, could help his Republicans, except with progressive Americans who will be alarmed. So,
But
yeah,
can
foreign
I add one
policy,
more thing?
yeah.
I'm sorry to make it crazy. The paradox here is that you could have a Republican candidate running saying, I will support President Trump 100%, including on his peace moves, when you have the progressive groups like J Street basically not saying boo about the Board of Peace or being very cynical or critical of it. So you could have a pro-Trump peace plan Republican get AIPAC support over a liberal Democrat who should ostensibly be advocating for peace. Does it? This is what we call a balagan.
Okay, a mess, as Israelis would put it. The Republican Party, though, has its divisions as well, right? Tucker Carlson, being very vociferous, and others saying, let's stay out of foreign affairs. Maybe they say that. Let's forget about allies. Let's not spend money, and let's not help Israel. Is the Trump White House standing firm with a more traditional support for Israel?
This is a great question. The infrastructure broadly, yes, and President Trump certainly yes. but there's a lot of weak legs in the stool out there, and this flared this past week at a meeting called basically a religious liberty meeting organized by the White House with a bunch of allies of the White House on religious issues, and a Christian nationalist, a former Miss California, came out and basically said, I'm going to criticize Israel and it's okay. And Candace Owens is not anti-Semitic, and you're calling me an anti-Semitic because I criticize Israel, and got into a big public fight with the Republican Jewish activist Shabbos Kestenbaum, and the activist, got kicked off the panel by the chair, Dan Patrick, who's the lieutenant governor in Texas, right? So we're talking total flare blow up right there, basically attacking Israel. And so there are a lot of concerns about the next generation of Republicans. I don't think it's all in one direction or another, but there's an internal battle amongst the young people, Christian Zionists, evangelicals losing some of their power over the message, the MAGA world wanting to be more isolationist, still pro-Israel, but certainly pro-Trump. But it's caused a lot of stress, and it all comes back to Iran. I swear to God, all of this centers right back on Iran. With the Democrats, it's a lot more about Palestine and Gaza. With the Republicans, it's about Iran. This idea of starting another war in the Middle East and getting involved in major military action turns off a lot of the Republican base. That's what we're talking about.
Okay, meaning, of course, foreign affairs is part of American politics, does affect voters, not as much maybe as the price of groceries, as President Trump seems to be aware of now, not as much as, but is it in large part whether Trump looks decisive, strong, on top of things? And how does that affect the midterms, by the way? The president's not on the ballot this November.
No, he's not. And in fact, that is for Republicans, even though his numbers are pretty poor nationally in polling, he's still a magnet for Republican voters to come out and vote. And by not being on the ballot, he's going to resort to more arguments about protect me from impeachment and other types of arguments, and they're trying to steal the election. But look, he is making this a foreign policy presidency. Donald Trump is making this a foreign policy presidency because he's highly active related to Venezuela, Canada, Western Hemisphere hegemony, Greenland, Russia, Ukraine. He's going to China in a couple of months. Obviously, we're talking about Iran and Israel. And so it is an unavoidable issue to discuss, and that will force candidates to take positions regardless of whether or not they want to, or the voters are asking. They will have to. And I think we're going to see candidates essentially making points about foreign policy because the president is making it such a high level visibility issue, and add tariffs to that list for his presidency.
Joel, take the last minute just to analyze what Israeli voters, Israeli leaders might think about with their election coming up sometime between now and October. They're frustrated that Hamas still has weapons and is still in Gaza, not fully defeated. The Iran issue, full of question marks, and the alliances with the U.S. add worldwide anti-Semitism. President Herzog goes to Australia to mourn the victims of the Bondi Beach massacre. And there are big demonstrations in Australian cities still against Israel and in support of Hamas. A lot of frustrations for Israelis in their little country of 10 million people looking at the world.
Yeah, I mean, for Israelis, looking at the post dynamic in Gaza and also what's happening in the West Bank as well, I think they benefit from understanding that in the United States political context, there are limits. There is gravity to American foreign policy. It's not unlimited, whatever the Israelis are hoping the United States supports. And we see it with President Trump willing to talk to Iran. We see it with him saying, I want you to move on this board of peace, which implies I don't want you to go back to heavy military action inside Gaza. Pinpoint strikes are one thing, but not heavy boots on the ground. I think we would see him be very negative on that. And so the question for the Israeli voters heading into is, can can you live with this sort of uncertainty, inconclusiveness, and who is within your politics going to manage that best? Or are you going to push in directions that is going to test the limits of even President Trump, who really does want to support Israel in his bones, in his kishkas? And also, I have to add on the anti-Semitism charge. We're all in this boat together. American Jews, Israelis, Australian Jews, European, you name it, across the board. And we all need to stick together, and calling out people who are engaging in anti-Semitism is crucial. And there's a lot of I'll say this, and I'm going long, but I get very concerned when Jewish groups blame other Jews for anti-Semitism. All right, blaming Israeli policy, or blaming even blaming anti-Zionists to a certain extent, but I think that they're actually doing quite a lot of harm. We're not to blame for people coming at us and hating us, and so that's a longer fight, a longer battle. And in American Jewish life right now, there's a big debate about where do we put our money from the organizational level. Is it in the fight against anti-Semitism? Is it in Jewish education, Jewish pride? I personally think it's in both. I don't think you can have Jewish pride without fighting anti-Semitism. You can't fight anti-Semitism without Jewish pride. This is a long struggle, but when it comes to the hard security questions that we're talking about now, I think there are limits to how much the United States will allow Israel to go forward. And so within those contours is how Israeli voters should think, who's their leadership, which leaders are best positioned to deal with the gray.
Yeah, well, in democracies, voters will decide, and there are choices. That's Joel Rubin, very much an expert and an activist in that connection between foreign policy and politics in the United States, former State Department official in the Obama years. On Substack, you can see him and hear him. It's called The Briefing Book. That's your Substack. Joel Rubin, thanks for joining me on the Mossad Files.
Really appreciate it. Thanks, Dan.
And my thanks to all of you for watching this video extra from the Mossad Files. Please keep in mind, every week there's a new audio podcast, the Mossad Files. You can find it on all the podcast platforms. Please tell your friends, download and subscribe. That's the Mossad Files. Also, my most recent book with my co-author Yossi Melman is Target Iran. It's an ebook, very affordable, and it's the true story of how the Mossad penetrated Iran over the years and setting up that 12-day war this past June. And Yossi Melman and I also wrote this wider history of the Mossad and other Israeli intelligence and security agencies. It's called Spies Against Armageddon: Inside Israel's Secret Wars by Raviv and Melman. Thanks again for watching. I'm Dan Raviv.